to the horse's mouth. I've been waiting like 2 years to say that. I've missed this very much. I know some of you are very familiar, and maybe some of you, or I know some of you are brand new. So I just want to welcome those of you who are new. Welcome to what I have been missing the most from the last 2 years. Just to give you a little preview, so Horse's Mouth is a monthly storytelling night where there is a single theme, and we have 6 true stories that are told around that theme. They're 10 minutes each, so short, sweet. But the themes can be taken very liberally. They can be stretched in any number of ways, which is part of the interesting thing about it. And some people say, well, like, why true stories? Why not, fiction or poetry, which is also really great. But here's our idea here. So true stories are the one thing that all of us share. I mean, there's more than one thing that we all share, but that is something that we all share. Doesn't matter if you are super successful or you're down on your luck. Doesn't matter if you're old, doesn't matter if you're young, doesn't matter if you are rich, doesn't matter if you're poor, doesn't matter who you are, you have stories. And to be honest, listening to someone else's story, even if it's not about a major thing, can sometimes change the way that you see that person or yourself or a situation or the world. And since the last time we were here, 2 years ago, disconnection has become even more prevalent in our lives than it was before. And so we don't even talk to strangers as much as we once did, right? It was kind of rare when we talked to strangers before the pandemic, but nowadays it's even more rare, right? Strangers are a danger for all kinds of reasons, right? And so it's really rare that you get to see a total stranger or 6 total strangers stand up and tell you a tiny slice of something that happened in their lives. Maybe something that is monumentally life-changing for them, or maybe like a sliver of a moment. But you get insight into somebody that you would never have otherwise talked to or known about, and it is in some ways life-changing. The very first time, and this is actually sort of an anniversary, I realized tonight, so the very first Horse's Mouth was on September 25th, 2016. Yay! And the theme that night was the first time. Tonight's theme is starting over. So, there you have it. In 2016, we met in the parachute factory, and it was great. We were there for a few months, and then it got very cold, and there was no heat there. And Wessex graciously agreed to take us in and has sheltered us for many years, and we're really, really grateful that they've had us back. So, thank you guys so much. And this is also, if you've been here before, this is also much bigger. We have much more room. So at any point in the night, as people are telling stories, please feel free to come up and quietly, discreetly, but at your own convenience, you can come up and get beer, get a drink, get some popcorn, help yourself. We're here to listen to each other, to support. It's not super formal. This is a community, and we are here to enjoy being a community together. And so I'm very, very excited to be back. All right. Having said all of that, we have 6 stories about starting over in whatever form that means, and it's going to mean a whole bunch of different things. So our very first storyteller tonight is a bit of a celebrity, Mary Coomer. Mary is a native of Louisville, and she's driven up all the way from Louisville. She's lived in St. Louis. She went to St. Louis for college. She later lived on a farm in central Kentucky, and not very far from here in Girard County. Oh, am I saying that wrong? I'm from Texas. I don't know. Though I've been here for long enough, and I just had a panic attack when I saw that. But she lived in Queens for 20 years. which I think was probably very formative for her, knowing Mary. She held many desperate jobs until she returned to her original job as a teacher, most recently in middle school. Until lockdown, she was a fitness instructor for other senior citizens. But here's the thing you need to know about Mary. She is a regular at the Moth, Louisville Story Slam, and has been in their radio show a few times. And she has become a bit of the Moth, if you know anything about the Moth storytelling event. She is a bit of a hero, so we're really, really lucky to have her. Her story tonight is called Act 5, The Final 20. Mary.
Thanks a lot for being here, and thank you for having me, Jenny. Act 5, The Final 20. That means I turned 80 last year. So when it came to the topic of starting over, I was like, which time? Because I started over so many times. Now, I have been blessed with a pretty good sense of the absurd, which caused me a great deal of self-loathing most of my life, until I had this wonderful opportunity to look back on all the crazy, poor decisions I made and all the things I did for the wrong reasons. And that old proverb, fall 7 times, stand up 8. Well, I made it, so there you go. Now, whoever doesn't start over when they're in their 20s? You know, I went to the only college that would accept me, the only one I applied to, in St. Louis. And I really enjoyed it. I came back home to Louisville. I taught school. And that was around the time, if you've done your math, you know I was born in 1941. So around that time was the time of the Beatles. I was an English teacher. I wanted to go to England very badly. But I also, being young and very, very, very innocent, I decided I would like to have my very own Beatle. So I went to England. I did go visit all the greats, all the poets, and Westminster Abbey and everything. But I also met a young man there. And he came to America. And back in those days, boys and girls, you may not believe this, but if you wanted to have sex, you got married. And if you got married, you became a parent. Well, that's what happened. We had a baby Limey. That was starting over too. Needless to say, any marriage predicated on such shallow things was not going to last. So we got divorced. And once again, I started over. What is that saying? Second marriage is a time to pull over experience. That happens to be Dr. Johnson, if I recall. So I did it again. Married the fellow in Garrett County. Why? Because I spent the night with him in a hotel one time, and it had snowed that night, and he cleaned my windows. You know, scraped my windows. I mean, that may not be the only reason, but, you know, I was quite impressed with him. Oh, I thought that was nice. So we got married, and he called me down there to that farm in Garrett County, and we had some fun. Then, our house washed away in the Dix River flood of 1979. It washed away about 100 miles downriver. I had a little restaurant in Wilmore at the time, which is completely beside the point, but that too was a new beginning, but there just isn't enough time for me to go into all of that. I'm just kind of trying to hit high spots here. And, you know, obviously the most absurd things that I'm like, okay, let me marry this guy. Maybe she'll look so nice. So then after the flood, I still had my restaurant, but he'd been building a log house for about 3 years. And that washed away too. And so he lost his project, but I still had my little cafe and all my friends, and everybody was being so nice and bringing us all their old nasty clothes and everything that they were going to take to the Goodwill. You know what, if you know anybody ever lose anything in a flood or fire, give them money. Do not walk in with a big old black garbage bag and say, if you don't want any of this, just take it to the Goodwill. Don't do it. All right, so, but that's, anyway, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be ungrateful. But then he got a little bored because he didn't have his project anymore, so he left me for an older woman. He said he got tired of waiting for me to grow up. And I thought to myself, he thinks he's tired? So then as they say on NPR all the time, I moved to New York as one does. I just did. I just moved to New York. I mean, I didn't have my son didn't want to come. He wanted to stay with his father and with his stepmother. In Louisville, I got to a very nice school. And he came up for all his vacations and all that, said it was the best of both worlds. But you know, I had never lived alone in my life until I moved to New York when I was 40. So we're Catholic. And I just went there, to be honest with you, just to completely go to hell with myself. And I did a very good job of that. Sobriety came along in 1986, which was another new beginning. And it took me back to the classroom, teaching middle school. And that was, teaching middle school in Queens, New York, I have to tell you, I was so scared. I meant to say at the very beginning, I'm going to sound like I'm a fearless person. Oh, I did this, I went here, no. I was always scared, all the time. When I got that job at the Y to teach the silver sneakers to those senior citizens, I had a box in front of me, and it had every exercise written on it, so I could, it was like a filing cabinet in case I forgot what to teach them. But teaching that silver sneakers class, up until lockdown, was the best job I ever had. And I would say to them every day, you didn't throw anything at me. If you called me a bee, I didn't hear you. And you tried to do everything I asked you to do. So that was a new beginning. I was terrified. You know, there's that thing, feel the fear, but do it anyway. So what I really want to leave you with is when you're tempted to make a change, and it doesn't feel like just the perfect change, don't worry about it. There's no such thing. You know, and you can start over. Very few, I better be careful about that. There are many decisions that are reversible. You know, some aren't, but I just feel that it's taken me all these years to be able to look back with some gentleness toward myself. So you know, you can start that anytime. You don't have to wait till you're like elderly to do that. And give yourself credit for doing the best you can when the time comes, and for not, you know, sometimes I start over, I just didn't know what else to do with myself. I didn't know what the right thing to do was, I had no clue. But I had to do something. My dad always told me, never take a job without benefits. Always make sure you have benefits. So I took some really stupid jobs because I had benefits. You know, but then if I needed to go to the doctor, I could. I am not watching my time. Does anybody know how much time I have left? All right, okay. Well, because blah, blah, blah. You know, obviously I enjoy talking about myself and about what I've learned, because almost everything I learned was I felt a bitter lesson. It was hard. So, you know, when I moved to New York, somebody said, how did you get through all that flood and everything? I said, well, I laugh a lot, I cry a lot, I pray a lot, and I drink a lot. The only one I don't do now is the last one. And I don't believe I would be standing here at 81 years of age talking to you if I had kept that up. But I have a lot of heartfelt good things to say about starting over, especially after a failure. Especially when you're so down on yourself and then you really don't know what to do. And you might not do the very best thing first, but you'll do something first. And then along behind that might come something a little better, and a little better, and a little better. And I'm just so happy to be here. I had a lot of fun going back over my life and thinking about all of it, because none of it's hurt me anymore. You know, but the fact that I think that I went through what I did and felt how I felt, and needless to say, I've kept a diary every day since I was 13, so it's all there somewhere. But I'd like to thank you very much for your kind attention, and thank Jenny for having me up here.
But Lee Ferguson reads writing for a living, which still amazes him on a daily basis. Same. He also dabbles in horn blowing and other musical ventures and loves writing songs and making TikToks for his classes, even though he's way too old for it. And if you're so inclined, you may find his writing at leafericksonwrites.com. And it's spelled just like you would think. His story tonight is called "There Is No Way This Should Have Worked."
So, I just miraculously and amazingly finished 25 years of teaching. I'm not finished, but I just completed 25, and I'm like, wake up every day and go, wow, that's something. But I got into teaching by accident, which is a pretty cool thing. I had a bachelor's degree from Georgetown College in 1994, but I was the first person in my entire family, as far back as I know, who even went to college. I didn't know what to do with a degree. And so I was working in the Jif plant, driving a forklift, and go around the corners to be or not to be, that sort of thing. And didn't know, I had no direction in life. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And a friend of mine came to see me. He was in the Navy, he was on leave, and he said, I want to visit. I was like, cool, Brian's coming to visit. And then he wanted to go back to our high school, which was a Baptist school in southeastern Kentucky. And I was still religious at the time, but I was like, I don't want to go back to there. It's only been 7 years, and I need that space. But he's like, we can see Mr. Walters, and he was one of my heroes. And I was like, all right, I'll go. Henry Walters is amazing. If I can see Henry, then I'll go. And so he talked me into it, and while we were there, he said, let's go see the president of the school, whom I did not want to see. But I was like, all right, Turtle, you got me here, let's go. So we went over to the office, and he offered me a job teaching English. It was a private school, so you see the bachelor's. And he said, we want you to chair the English department. I was like, what? Really? Okay. So, well, this is the first thing that shouldn't have worked. This should have been a disaster because I was making decent money at Jif. And everybody was like, you can't leave. I had a 4-month-old daughter at the time, when I decided to leave. And my wife was at the time was all in favor of it, but it's scary. And everybody's like, you can't leave. You got to keep this job forever. But then they were kind of bedraggled and miserable, having been there for decades. And it's like, I don't know that I want to necessarily follow that route if I can help it. I mean, all work is honorable. There's nothing wrong with it. But they look beat down and miserable and cynical. I didn't want to be that. And so I took this plunge, and I took a 60% pay cut to go teach at this school. My wife and I made $11,000 between us for the entire year. Housing was provided, but so I go there, and I was also excited because, since I was 8 years old, we had gotten really involved in church because my mother was in disastrous circumstances. I come from poverty and every kind of dysfunction you can imagine. Murder, suicide, sex abuse, substance abuse, all the abuses. If I didn't experience it, I witnessed it. I knew someone in my family who had suffered it. And so, when I was 8, the church reached out to her and provided a lifeline, and it's still very important to her today. And so I got involved too. And over the years, I really put myself into it. I was into it. But the secret was, in my head, I always was like, I wanted that relationship, that peace that passes understanding. I never got any of that. I begged for it and wanted it. Got involved in church, started teaching Sunday school as I got older, etc., etc. But inside, I was just dismayed because nothing, really. I didn't need a sign. I wanted a connection. Nothing. So, but I was like, you know what? I'll believe these things. They're ludicrous to me. I'm not insulting anybody's religion. But I was like, I'll believe and sort of bank that so that when the revelation comes, when my spiritual eyes are open, I will see, and it'll all make sense, it'll all click into place. So I sort of carried that around with me. And so I'm teaching at this school, but I'll tell you something. Nothing teaches you if you want to be a fundamentalist, like working and living in a fundamentalist environment for a few years. That'll do it for you. You'll know one way or the other if you want to hang on and dig in, or if you want to vamoose. And after about a year, I was like, oh, I don't want this. This is terrible. And it wasn't even the strain of evangelicalism now that I'm not besmirching all of you. I'm talking about a certain strain of evangelicalism that's very strident and hateful. And it wasn't even that bad, but it was still so fundamentalism. I couldn't take it. But I couldn't just leave. I was like, what else was I going to do? And so I got this harebrained idea that I would get a master's degree and teach college. I was like, it's that easy. I'll just get a master's degree and I'll teach college. Well, I do teach college, so I did end up there, but that's why the story's called "This Should Not Have Worked." There are several things here that I should not have done. If I had been older and wiser and had read a lot of things I've read since then, I wouldn't have. So I drove to EKU. So I taught 7 classes a day, and sometimes during my free period. And then I had an infant, and I wanted the job. My ex loves her, but she didn't really want children. I talked her into that, and it turned out great. She's a 4.0 college student now, but she was very young at the time, and I was doing most of the work because I wanted to. That was my choice, and so I was doing that. I was teaching 7 or 8 hours a day, and then I would get in my car once a week and drive an hour and a half to EKU, sit in a 2-hour, 45-minute class, drive back an hour and a half, fall into bed, and get up the next morning at sunrise to do it when I do the classes every day. Thankfully, in the summer it was 4 days a week, but this was madness. I couldn't do it now. At 51, there's no way. But I was driven, and I had hallucinations on those trips. I was so exhausted that sometimes I got a Van Morrison obsession, and I was listening to just deep tracks in the little CD player between the seats of the car. It's the late 90s, and we hit a bump and skips, but all those mountain roads, I just, sometimes I didn't have hallucinations like I'm going to drive off the road, but stuff that just was like, I'd be listening to a song. Like one time I saw this sign sort of falling over, covered in like kudzu or something, and as I came around the corner, I'd seen that sign 1,000 times, and I still to this day don't know what it was, but I had this sort of cosmic consciousness. The only way I can describe it stealing from Alan Watts. I had this sort of cosmic consciousness experience where everything seemed like it was one thing, and it all made sense. Everything. The good, the bad, the ugly, just all of a sudden, whoo! And I tried my damnedest to attribute that to a deity or something supernatural. And I tried to sink my teeth into it. I used to write for the Christian blog back then, and I tried to write about it, calling it grace, and it just didn't click for me. Again, I don't know bad about thinking that if your religion means something to you, why would you abandon it, right? Of course, my mother and I, we don't see eye to eye on that. We love each other very much. I just had lunch with her last week. So I love it for people that works for it. So for me, it was always like a suit that was too big or too small. It never quite fit me right. And so I'm wearing myself doing this thing which shouldn't have worked. I get this master's degree, and I thought, now's the time for me to strike. I'll send out queries all over the place. Before the internet was used for applying for jobs, so I was filling out applications, writing letters, send them all over the United States. I wanted out. It's like, please, somebody. But of course, crickets, nothing. And I was pretty discouraged, and I was like, what am I going to do? I had been there, coming up about 4 years now, and I didn't want to be there anymore. I had some good friends there and some good times, but I was done. I wasn't quite done with my Christianity at that point, but I was done with that. I needed out. And so I heard about it from my friend, Sean. I heard about this job at Madison Community College in like the government grant program that recruits kids for college. And I thought, you know what? Maybe I'll apply for that. Him and Paul and Sean called me one night. He's like, I hope you're done searching your soul. He was real sarcastic, because that's what I told him. I was doing soul searching. He's like, the deadline is tomorrow. And this was, you couldn't fill it out online, so I had to drive 45 minutes to a post office that was still open and drop that application in the mail so it would be stamped that day. So I got offered the job for this grant program, which I was terrible at. That's another story. They didn't think I was terrible. I felt terrible at it. I didn't feel like a good fit. But I got the job, but here's the thing, there were 2 positions. One was full-time with benefits and would stay on after a year. The other one might stay on after a year. They were trying to write it in the grant, but there were no benefits for that year. And that's the one I was offered. I had more qualifications than the other person, but who knows? Everything worked out like it should, but I got that job, and I had a 4-year-old. And so I spent a year married with a 4-year-old with no health insurance, no any benefits at all, with no promise of a job after a year. And I took the job. And I drove that car into the ground. It was a Mitsubishi, and I messed it up. It got to the point where this thing called a flex plate broke. I don't even know what that is still. I just know the words because some mechanic shook his head very ruefully and told me that the flex plate was broken. What it sounded like is a Vietnam helicopter. And this little white Mitsubishi, everywhere I drove, it was so loud, it's so embarrassing. And I was driving on EKU's campus trying to get my paperwork and, you know, pulling into the administrative parking lot. And so I got this job. I moved. My friend Sean got me an apartment without, I hadn't seen it. He had seen it. He went and looked and got an apartment set up for us. We moved there. That was a whole other disastrous story. My daughter didn't want to leave. She was sad. We delivered daycare friends, but you know, she's glad now we did. But when I got there, it was September 11th, 2001. It was like really early on in the job, and I drove that car down to the gas station that night to get the latest newspaper headline about what was going on. How many of you remember that? But I needed to know. And that car never started. I pulled in the gas station, September 11, 2001, about 7:30 p.m. Car never started again. I had to leave it there, get a ride home. But I had the job. And then I did something else that you shouldn't do. I'm a little over. I apologize. But I did something else you shouldn't do. And I said, I'm going to go, now that I'm at this college, I'm going to start doing adjunct teaching and get a full-time job. There were no full-time jobs available. They weren't turning loose those jobs. But I was like, oh, and I read years later, by the way, in the Chronicle of Higher Education, it outlined what you should not do to get a college teaching job, and I did every single thing on the list, and it somehow worked. So I got in there, and then it turned out they opened the Muhlenberg County campus, the Central City campus at Everly Brothers bankrolled, and they needed a full-time faculty member there. I applied. I got the job, which shouldn't have happened. And then after I got settled in there, I was at Madisonville for 4 years, and I decided I want to come back to my hometown where my mother and sister are, and so I applied to Lexington, figuring I wouldn't get that job either. And everybody in Madisonville was like, you can't leave, please don't leave. I was very close, we were all very close in the English department there, I still miss them all terribly. But I knew what I had to do, and I came to Lexington. Now, in the middle of all this, as I'm extracting myself from fundamentalism, you know, I have this, my Christianity ended in a very cinematic fashion with me in the middle of the road, shaking my fist and saying, if you are there, come at me. And I still have a standing order out. If you know any deities, gods, goddesses, and all the above, why would I not want to know? Of course I would want to know. Have them come find me. I beat on the door for a lot of years, and I was like, finally, I'm going to be over here doing some stuff, so come find me. And that's where my Christianity ended up. But, you know, I have an open relationship with the truth, is the way I like to put it, so whatever. And I'll end with this. One time, some friends were in a big fight, argument. And actually, it's now my wife, but it was her best friend at the time. They were in an argument. And I was kind of trying to stay out of it. Getting pretty heated, and she said, she called him out, she goes, why don't you tell Leaf that when you thought about him being a second-rate community college professor? I can't help but laugh, and I started cracking up right there in that room, and they looked at me like I was crazy. They didn't understand why I laughed until I cried, because to me, the miracle, it is an ironic word considering I abandoned my religion, but the miracle of being a second-rate community college professor and climbing on the shit heap I climbed off of somehow and doing all these incredibly preposterous, really kind of stupid things and ending up as a second-rate community college is one of the best things that ever happened to me. So, thank you all for listening.
So, one of our storytellers, she's told stories for us for many years. Unfortunately, she was skeletal tall. She has an incredibly terrible ear infection, and so she's had to cancel. Which is actually fortunate because I was thinking about this story. So I'm gonna tell you all a story that I was thinking about telling for next month. So this is a little bit of a preview. I'm gonna tell a story as a way of previewing our next month's theme, because I think it fits both. So I think it's probably not a surprise that a lot of tell over the years we've heard, you know, they have something to do with high school. High school's a weird time, any way you cut it. I don't care who you are, it's just a weird time. Teenagerhood is a weird time. And when I was in high school, my parents were involved in a very high-control religious group, which is, you know, its own whole story. But as a result of that, when I was 15, I was sent to a boarding school that was affiliated with this religious group for a year. And it, you know, not a great time, I would say. You know, in general, like you're 15, nothing's great, but that was especially not great when you're 15. But my parents eventually left. I came back home and we moved. We did live in Texas, which is why I don't know where our community, I apologize. But I came back in the middle of my junior year, we had moved, and so I started a new school in the middle of my, you know, junior year of high school. I had just left this, you know, a high-control religious group, this boarding school. And I'm like, I've got to start over. Like, I have to be somebody, I can't be the weird girl who showed up, so I'm, you know, sort of inventing. But everybody's kind of got a question, like, where did you go to school last year? And I'm like, oh, you know, you know, luckily it's the 90s, pre-internet, so you're like, you can't, like, check this out. But I was still sort of the weird girl who didn't really have a background. Everybody's a little bit like, her story's kind of weird. And so around senior year, I thought, all right, I'm really going to start over in college. College is going to be like the break. And in order to do this, I do have to make a clean break. So that's me starting over, right? Starting over is where you're like, oh, all right, well, let's burn this bridge, and then, you know, you start over. And so I thought, in order to do this, I'm going to do the whole thing. You know, so it's senior year, and I thought, I'm not even going to, no senior pictures. So senior picture day comes around for the yearbook. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not, you know, class pictures. I was on the swim team. Like, no, I'm not going to be in the picture. Like, I'm making a whole new start. I'm making basically like I'm becoming a ghost. I'm ghosting myself, and I'm going to become a new person. Clean break, and then, you know, went to college and you know, seemed to work for like almost 30 years. And then I had a Gen Z teenager. I still do. I mean, I have currently a Gen Z teenager. So, one day I get a message from her, a text, and she says, you know, I found this website where you can look up anybody online and their old yearbooks. And so, you graduated high school in 1993, right? Yeah. From South Grand Prairie High School, yeah. Yeah, it's weird because everything in your book says not pictured. It's weird, like there's no photo of you. You're like the only one that's not pictured, and then like all these clubs you said you're part of, it says not pictured. What is that all about? And it was like I had been hiding out for 30 years, and suddenly the FBI caught up with me, and I was like, oh no. And actually, I felt more like it was like a bad sci-fi movie where like I was being lapped by a younger version of me, like from a, you know, like I was like, oh no, our time loops are out of sync. The not me of my teenage years was suddenly haunting me. And so I had to answer all these questions, like, why did you not have a picture? It was like, well, because I wanted to make this restart. Why'd you want to do that? Well, it's complicated, and then, you know, and suddenly, like, all of my plans from 30 years over, you know, 30 years earlier, from never having to, like, talk about any disease, now I'm, like, talking about them ad nauseum, like, way more than if I just would have taken the picture to begin with. And I was like, oh no, I'm now living in this world that I thought I had escaped. And it's kind of I realized like it's a really interesting experience to ghost yourself, because I always thought like ghosting is sort of if you're a ghost, let's just say, becoming a ghost is like, you would think the ultimate starting over again, right? Like you've got everything to relearn. You don't have a body, you've got a bunch to relearn. But this instance where when I went to college, I threw away everything. I threw away all of my journals that I had written my whole life. I threw away all the pictures I possibly could. I threw away everything. And so when my daughter starts, on this thing, she starts asking like, why don't you get pictures of yourself from high school? Like, why do you not have any of these things? And you have to explain, like, I'm a ghost. I'm trying to ghost myself. And then how weird that is. Like, okay, ghosts are. You would think that becoming a ghost is like a clean break. Like, I'm a ghost. I've made a clean break, and now you're here, and now it's sort of, kind of impinging on my ghostness. And I realized, like, ghosts aren't clean breaks. Of course not, right? Ghosts are still like their normal self, but now they're in a weird space, but they're still the same. And it's kind of like starting over. Like starting over, I used to think it was like a clean break, right? Like you make a break and then you start over again. But it's not. It's like a pause. It's like an interruption. And it's like, you push pause on something. And at the time, I think, that would have been horrifying to me because I didn't want to pause. I wanted a clean break. I wanted, to know that there was some way of being able to destroy something that you didn't want, and then you got to wake up tomorrow and you had a whole new life. I think it would have been a real bummer at the time to be like, yeah, I don't catch up with you. One day you'll have there's this thing on the internet, and you've got this Gen Z, and then it would have been a real bummer. But I think looking back, it's actually, weirdly enough, kind of comforting to know that it wasn't ever a clean break. It was a pause. And you can unpause it at a certain point. Maybe when you're ready, maybe sometimes it unpauses itself, but nothing's ever completely broken off, even in starting over, right? And I think it takes a little bit to learn, like starting over, it's not an either or. You're not starting from scratch, but you're not really leaving everything behind. And so this story, I had originally thought about telling for next month, because our theme is ghost, and thematically enough. But we were thinking about ghosts in general, right? October, scary times. We were also thinking about it as the verb, right? You say it now, like how many times you ghost somebody or you get ghosted. What if you ghost yourself? So this is a small preview for, just to get your minds thinking. If you do want to tell a story about ghosts, ghosting, let us know if at the end of all this you think, I have a story about ghosting I'd like to tell. We would very much like to hear it. So, with that in mind, our next storyteller is Marianne Miranda. And Marianne, I will say this, just so you know, there are some keywords here that maybe is like content warning, content knowledge, some of the words like cult, mental illness, generational trauma, although she had it pretty mild. I mean, that's what most of us have experienced, so, suicide, emotional abuse, and Christmas being canceled, which, I appreciate that that's also a content warning. But Marianne is a native of Eastern Kentucky, where storytelling is necessary for survival.
Thank you.
She's a former teacher turned attorney and business consultant based in Lexington. And she may want to be a forest ranger when she grows up. And she has told a story before, the horse's mouth, way back in the before times in 2018 or thereabouts. And her story tonight is called Sistering, or How I Lost a Sister and Found Her Again in a Single Lifetime.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'm going to tell you guys a story I've never told before. No single human being in the world had ever heard this complete story until last Friday. And so you guys are either lucky or unfortunate. But this is a story that could be talked. We could call it starting over. We could also call it coming out. Just bear with me, and I'll also tell you this story is actually being written in real time, and you'll see why. I actually just rewrote it again. So starting now. When you have 3 daughters and no sons, I was assumed that the third is born to take on the pain of all the others. That's because it was in my family. Like Lear, there was no kingdom to split, and I was Cordelia. Silent, hoping for an acknowledgement that I existed, always to blame. For the fight that my parents had, for why my mother had migraines, for why the cake fell, for any time they felt bad. They snapped and snarled, and they felt better for seeing me recoil. And these weren't horrible people, just very broken people, very sad people. My parents were part of the silent generation, and they were lost in their own way. My sisters, who were 16 and 18 years older than me, had seen it all come apart. My bright-eyed, witty, sharp-tongued mother slowly disappeared into loneliness hundreds of miles from her home in Mississippi as she sat in eastern Kentucky. My father became disenchanted with the world and the promises that just didn't keep from the shiny new post-war promises. He sank into a type of despair and OCD when he left Washington, where he worked for the FBI, to return to Ashland to work for the post office. He had an almost fervid need to take control. And so, after just being angry young parents, my dad decided to join a church. A cult, really. And if you're familiar with Armstrongism, the worldwide church God, with its tithing and its odd theology, it has some not-so-subtle racism, and even has less subtle misogyny, if that's possible. We were Sabbatarians waiting for the end of the world. We were chosen. We were all going to flee to the desert, and we were going to wait for the second coming. So this all happened before I was born. My family quit celebrating Christmas. They became alienated from friends and family. My mother became lonelier. My sister and later me would walk into this weird tightrope between God and the real world. The real world had football games and homework and crushes and plans to go to college. God didn't want those for us. Of course, I was born into it. And my sisters were 9 and 11 when Christmas was canceled. And they were insanely jealous of me because I never knew what that was like. So, one of my sisters, Cindy Ann, because we all had double names. My mom's from Mississippi. Mary Ann, Cindy Ann, Carol Jane. One of my sisters and I share a middle name. But she might as well have been, she might as well have been Lear's Regan. She was the enemy of all other joys than my father's. She refused to wear yellow because he hated it. She only ate foods that he liked. My mother railed against her, favored me, but blamed me for this. And Cindy did it to survive. My older sister, Carol Jane, she was never quite goneril, but she was a wild creature who wanted to escape. She was the most sullen, beautiful, and hurt person I've ever met. Anyway, childhood with my sisters is just a bit of a jumble. Carol moved out with her husband by the time I was 2. Cindy married and was gone by the time I was 6. And those days are really strange in my mind. Clear memory for me is being chased down a hallway and a bright green glass-like hard candy was lodged in my throat. And I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know if I did that to myself or if somebody did it to me. And what I remember better is that my sister Cindy, who was watching me at the time, complained bitterly about it. And I thought it was because I was a horrible child. I should have died choking on that candy. In retrospect, I wonder how often my care was foisted on her. And so maybe I understand it a little better now. I remember laying on a pillow in my older sister's room watching her put on her makeup before she left for community college classes. It turns out when you have trauma, you have early cradle memory. So I remember really strange things. I remember the view of the public stairs looked in my lecture room because sometimes she would take her with me. Her love was really painful. She held onto me really tight. And it was really hard to bear, the obsession. Eventually, her boyfriend showed up on a motorcycle. I remember how tense my parents' voices were. I remember them telling her not to go. I remember my father shouting. And she went. Eventually, she married him. She moved into an apartment over a pet store. She later moved into a trailer. Finally, she moved to a ramshackle house in a washed-out holler along Newland Branch. It was infested with squirrels. She baked cookies, and my niece and nephew were born. All 3 of us at this time were trying to survive, but each of us went our own way. We weren't united. It was everyone for themselves. And I guess that's the dangerous part of having exceptionalism in your family, which is what my father got us into with that cult. I, of course, handled it in a different way, and they were jealous because I got out of it differently. I went to college. I went to law school. I moved to Europe. And now here I am tonight. I don't live in my hometown. I'm telling this story to you all after years of therapy. So I had a very different experience. I will never forget, though, I also got married. And I think back on that. I got married 10 years after I graduated from high school, pretty normal time, but I think I got married to escape that too. It's another way of saying I'll never go back. So it's colored all of our lives. So, this is where we're headed. Each of us eventually broke. There was strain, there was challenge in each of our lives. My sister Carol had an abusive husband, she had poverty, she had paranoid schizophrenia, and finally she had a psychotic break, which she was brilliant, so it was hard to see for a long time. Anyway, she refused to take medication. So it took 30 years for her to really escape. She ultimately died in a hospital. She aspirated on her own vomit after a surgery. And that's a story for another day. But she escaped it all. And it's funny, I miss her less than I grieve how it all might have been. And that's where our real story starts tonight. My other sister, Cindy, and I were left. She was left without the girl she shared a bedroom with. I was a stranger, and there was no grieving allowed. We weren't allowed to speak of Carol's illness. It was her fault. For once. I was sure it was also my fault. But I had had years of therapy at that point. Cindy glared at me, I thought, but I think in retrospect she just couldn't cry. Her life had been relatively straightforward, I thought. Like my oldest sister and me, she married. She married young, maybe just to leave the house. She raised 2 kids. She worked a job until it made her sick. She blamed me when her children misbehaved, and she probably would have blamed me if the well had run dry. But even so, despite all of that, she was what I had. She was who I called when I was a teenager and she was in her 30s, when I needed a ride to the dance, when my hair needed curled for a date. I was desperate for something even remotely normal, and I held my heart in my throat as I asked her. She always came. She complained. She yelled at me. She called me names. But she came. And eventually, I would leave, and after a long while, her son, who was 7 years my junior, he would go to prison for dealing drugs. Our daughter would weather 3 marriages. Later, and this is a hard part, her son would put a Smith & Wesson to the roof of his mouth, and he would leave bits of skull and brain on her ceiling while she sat watching television next to him. And he survived. She quietly went to bed 4 weeks later, knowing he would make it, and she quietly had a stroke. I worried. I kept my barriers up. I worried. And she survived. And no one told me anything. I couldn't get any details because we weren't going to talk about it. It was probably my fault. I had to pick it up in pieces. And maybe it was just easier for everybody to pick on me, to blame me, to make me the focus of not knowing. I'll never know. Okay, so time passes. I almost forgot all of this again. My father-in-law died quickly of a cancer over 5 months. Coming out of that, a month later, my mother called me and said she was going off of dialysis. One day she would fall in the kitchen onto a burning stovetop and sear the outline of a pan into her face as the ammonia picked up in her body. And thankfully my father was there. He raced in, and fast as the man has ever moved, he pulled her off of the stove before her caught fire, but not before her skin had melted on a good portion of her face. So the last 6 weeks of her life, we were doing wound care, we were dealing with her kidneys shutting down, and my sister and I were there. We took care of her. My dad helped, but he was not great at it. And I just remember feeling like my heart was breaking for 1,000 reasons, because things were ending, and there was no more time. There's no more time to start over. And every time I made the drive from Lexington to my hometown in Ashland, for that 6 weeks, I would try to keep my mind blank. It never failed. At mile marker, I think it's 118, right outside of, just before you get to, what is it called? Like Trenchburg. Beautiful, beautiful scenery there. I would pull to the side of the road and shake uncontrollably, and I would cry. And sometimes it would last 5 minutes, and sometimes it would last an hour. Eventually, I got back into therapy. I asked for anything they could give me. I was willing to take any drug they would give me to keep myself calm through this. I just had to stay going. And when my mom died, I wasn't there. I was at work, and my sister didn't call me. Her husband called me, and he said, "Your mother's gone," and he hung up. And so I just quit thinking about it because I couldn't take it. Around January, that was in 2016, January 2000. My dad had been alone for 3.5 years. We noticed he was forgetting things. The electric bill, where the side view mirror on the car had gone, and we didn't know why. A little conversation, my sister started staying days and nights with him. He began to take falls, he began to shuffle his feet, his words were slurred. Cindy took him to the doctor over and over and over again, and for the first time in my life, she'd call me. She'd say, what do you think it is? We'd read through the symptoms, we'd use the Dr. Google, we would find ourselves looking things up in medical journals. He made sense and then he didn't, and the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong. Finally, we knew it. It had to be some sort of hydrocephaly, and it was. We insisted on MRI and found out, in fact, he had normal pressure hydrocephaly. With time, she and I would take a few minutes, and we would pass the baton while we were caring for him. As medical needs became greater, we were taking him to a neurologist. We were going to have a shunt placed for him so that his health would improve. We would meet in the middle. How has he been? 4 nights on for her, 3 nights on for me. How has he been? What do you think he ought to do tomorrow? Here's when he last took his medicine. And then we'd separate. That was it, 5 minutes. Of course, we were all watching the news, like everybody in this room was. Italy, Spain, New York, Toronto, Seattle. And we were stuck in a terrible place by March of 2020. His neurology appointments were canceled. His surgery was canceled. He was failing, and we knew his lifespan was going to be normal and his body would not be. So, because he had to have an elective surgery, they said, he would have to wait. The moments that we changed places grew longer. Were we doing the right thing? Should we press him for surgery? Should we protect him from this virus that may make him horribly alone and confused? By the time he was rescheduled in August, it was too late. There was a strong chance the shunt placement wouldn't do any good because the damage was too great. Dad was terrified of the surgeon, and he was persuaded the surgeon wanted to kill him. Dad had really become paranoid, and so my sister sat in the exam room with me on the telephone, and her voice got tighter and tighter. She was asking question after question. And finally, she said, Marianne, I suppose we take him home, right? It wasn't permission. It wasn't an attempt to shift the blame. It was a call for me to sit in her pain with her, and it was a first. And the fear that we had done the wrong thing, and even though there was really nothing different that we could have done, we were finally bound. We went back to our cycle, on, off. Only now Dad was incontinent. He was dropping food out of his mouth. He wanted sweets and only sweets. We plied him with every food we knew how, and we sat around the kitchen table, she and I, hung over the edges of neighboring chairs in the living room. We whispered about Dad, about her son, about his divorce that wouldn't end, about how she hadn't seen her grandchildren in 2 years, how he was changing as his brain was deteriorating. We talked about her daughter's new house. She begged for news of my children, because I had 2 by now. She whispered that her husband wasn't helping her. One day she sobbed out loud. Why did they do this to us? Why did they take Christmas? Why did they take our friends? Why did they take it all away? I'd never heard her say that. And I didn't know what to say. So I just sobbed too. More time has passed. And eventually we gave each other these awkward hugs. And she would breathe the word, I love ya, as she went out the back door. And I think she thought I couldn't hear her. Of course I did. I was always to blame, so I was listening. Dad's paranoia grew greater, and as it did, and as our fear grew greater, I began to say I love you back to her. And she started to say it a little bit louder. Dad eventually became aggressive. He'd grab the bath attendant's breasts. He would pick up a gun that we didn't even know that he had one day when my sister was coming out of the laundry room, and he would point it down the hallway at her because he didn't know who she was. And then she called me breathless. What do? Life had become this fever dream of endless elder care, working out our relationship. We were changing diapers, changing sheets, steaming carpets, mopping floors, making sure that Dad didn't spit on the rug, making sure that nobody breathed in the house, and we were alone together. Eventually one night, we couldn't lift him from the floor when he fell, and we called for an emergency medical service crew. It must have been the 4th or 5th time that month. And what does William Yeats say in the poem? When all ladders are gone, I lie down where all the ladders begin, in the rag and bone shop, our heart. And that's where we sat that night, side by side, our backs against the wall on the carpet. We couldn't keep clean because of Dad's failing bladder. We stared straight ahead and we said it almost together, it's time. Dad took another fall the next day. We had him transported to the hospital, and from there he went straight to a nursing facility. This was in the middle of COVID. We didn't see him again for 3 weeks. We reasoned that it was probably good for him, and we just stuck it out. Our visits were limited to the window and eventually to the memory care unit's iPad. Dad would turn it over and over while we were talking to him to try to figure out if we were behind it. And she and I would just sit there and hold hands. He refused to eat, so Cindy made him meals every day and passed him through a half-opened door and begged the nurses to feed him. Eventually, she just walked in one day and acted like she owned the place. Nobody ever stopped her. Dad did get a little bit better. During this time, I stayed in Ashland a lot, and she and I spent nights together in his house. Late at night, we'd talk, we'd tell each other things we loved, we'd tell each other what we were afraid of. These were the things that scared us and the things that made us feel the best. We ate candy and gluten-free cookies and acted like very tired children who had been left alone for a few hours. We were living under the roof for the first time in 40 years, but maybe the first time in our life. Eventually, just as she was beginning to feel rested, because she had taken on the lion's share of this, her mother-in-law had surgery to deal with an aortic aneurysm. She died several weeks later from complications. My sister took care of her too. She would call me from the hospital room, she'd call me from the bathroom, and in whispers she would say, "I'm so scared. I don't know what to do. No one's helping me. I'm alone." And she soldiered on. I checked on her hourly. I sent her memes. I kept my ringer on at night so she could call. All of this happened, and eventually death came, as it always does. She buried her mother-in-law. The estate was probated efficiently, as my sister does things. And then she called me about 3 weeks later. "I'm at the hospital," she said. "I can't see. It's just bright light. I'm scared. My head aches." Her blood pressure was so high that it scared the doctors at the ER. When she woke up later from sedative, she was covered in wires and she couldn't see still. Somehow she found her phone on the bedside table and she called me. She figured out where the numbers were. And she said, "I'm scared." She remembered I was her little sister, maybe for the first time ever. And she said, "Don't be scared." Anyway, I didn't sleep for about a month because I was afraid of living in a world where I didn't have her anymore. And this was going to be the finish of my story, right? This was going to be the part where I told you guys that she survived and we had this great relationship. And we have. We had this wonderful year. In that year I had my own depression. You know, we all did after COVID. It took some while to uncover some trauma that I had experienced in the workplace. And when I finally did, it was like a dam broke, and I called my sister. And I said, this is what happened. And I left her response, it was, "If I'd known, I'd have killed him." But she also said out loud, "Don't be afraid." And then she said the words that really broke me. She said, "This isn't your fault. This isn't your fault." And I still feel that when I stand here today. Because you know what? She said those words to me on Friday. "Don't be afraid. This isn't your fault." It was a faint voice. It was tired and hoarse. She had a heart attack. It's all gotten to her. She's 63. She was feeling better yesterday. She's feeling better today. And when I tell you I've rewritten this story in the moment, I got a text saying at that table back there from her daughter is my niece. And she said she's being transferred to another hospital. Her heart is doing worse. She said to tell you, "Don't be afraid. Stay where you are tonight." She said, "Go tell me the story you told me on Friday." So here I am. It's not my fault. I'm afraid. And I'm so grateful that I got a chance before I got the chance to start over. And I'm really, really grateful I got to tell you all this story. I hope there's still something in it that resonates with each of you. Thanks.
I will say, for those of you who have not been here over the years, or maybe haven't been here so much, there are stories that I remember that made me laugh so hard because they're so ridiculous, little things that happen. But then there are stories that people share that I drew on in various points. When my dad died in 2018, I remember I was on my way to the funeral, and it was actually a night of a horse's mouth, and Anna back there filled in. And I remember thinking, like, I would actually love to be there, because in that moment I sort of drew on so many of those stories that I had heard. It suddenly made sense to me. So our next storyteller is brand new to the Horse's Mouth, and we're really excited to have her. Lori Werner used to read a lot, I bet she still does, but her phone has ruined her attention span. Join the club. She's in grad school, runs a small business full-time, and somehow managed to add another thing to her schedule, storytelling. She is a poet. but she's decided to try something new and explore storytelling. And she's always looking for new product recommendations, so please pass those on to her. Her story tonight is called The Bruise.
Hi, I'm very slutty. So I fall down a lot. I have this giant bruise on my arm right now, and I didn't plan it for this. It seems pretty unlucky. I've been clumsy my whole life. My partner jokes and says that they're gonna wrap me in bubble wrap at some point. But I've always been extremely clumsy. My teenage years especially, I'm from Savannah, Georgia. I was very awkward, trying to find my way around, stumbling, falling down constantly, literally and figuratively. In my 20s, I got laid off from a really good job. I was in a bad relationship for 8 years, and I was still in Savannah, where I grew up, wanting to leave, not knowing where to go. So I got laid off, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna break up with this person, and I'm gonna put all of my energy into my business that I started, which is a little pet sitting business. And after a few months, it blew up, and I was doing it full time, hiring employees, and I created this wonderful little monster. Then I noticed after a couple of years that I had a little bit of a problem with drinking. And I realized this because I drove to a comedy show in Charleston, which is about 2 hours from Savannah, drank an entire bottle of wine, and then drove back to Savannah. And the next morning I woke up and I thought, I'm never gonna drink again. So I quit, and then I thought that that was gonna be the end of my problems, but really that is what led to my emotional rock bottom. So I had to navigate all of these feelings that I had been suppressing with alcohol and working too much, and I came out. And I met someone, and I thought, okay, great, I'm finally being myself. I'm in a queer relationship with this great person. However, she was not that great. So we broke up. And I continued to stumble around the dating world as a baby gay. At 30 years old, which is very weird. So then I finally met someone that lived in Lexington, Kentucky. And I thought, why don't I sell my business and move to Lexington for a person I barely know? So I did that, and here I am. 2 weeks later, the pandemic hit. I was quarantined suddenly with someone that I'd been in a long-distance relationship with that I realized I did not know. So what do you do in an awkward situation like that? You propose. And I did, and she said yes. So we did that for a few months, and then she finally broke up with me. And then here I was, almost 35, in a new city. I had lived in Savannah my entire life, never left. So moving here was a really big deal. And I thought, you know, I did that big thing that one time. I can do all this other stuff that's happening. So I got into grad school, and I started running my business here full time. I just full steam ahead, put all of my energy into it, and it worked out. Now I'm in a loving relationship, and I've noticed that through all these things that have happened, it's not about learning how to not fall down. It's about learning how to get better at getting up. And I'm really good at falling down. Starting over is not a once-in-a-lifetime event. It's an experience. It's in the big things like moving to a new city, and it's in the little things like choosing what song I want to listen to next. You get to start over each day, and I think that's pretty lucky.
So Ian is an observer of the world, and he loves certain things that he's passionate about, including writing, playing music,
stand-up comedy and, of course, storytelling. And he is a veteran of Horse's Mouth. And I hope that I'm not like spoiling his own story, but originally the story was, he had the story planned for pre-pandemic, and then, you know, he went on 2 hiatus, and then the story has taken a twist and turn now post. So here's the story with a bit of a twist. I'm giving this all away, but it's called Hopelessly Unromantic.
All right, let me check the volume because I'm a little louder than the last couple of folks. Can you hear me? All right, so my story, as Jenny said, when we were going to get together last year, was about finding love.
That's not how the story ends.
But I got to start over. I got to do new things. I didn't decide to fall in love, but I decided to see what happens while we were in the middle of a pandemic. Not the best time. It's alright. So I met a girl. She, on our second conversation, told me about how she thought the Democrats had babies in tunnels in Washington or eating them. I didn't fall in love with her. But weirdly enough, she had a friend and thought the friend may like me. So I was like, cool, I'll meet your friend. I'm probably not going to like her. We were both in a position, I think we both needed a distraction. We both wanted to have a little fun in a horrible time in history. So we decided to do that together. We had fun for a few months, and then she caught the feels. I did. So then we spent the next year plus in love. It was great. And then all of a sudden the world opened back up and things changed. Luckily it wasn't a horrible breakup. We just kind of both fell out of love, I guess, which makes you think it wasn't that significant, but it was significant. It was a lot. So I was going to break up with her, and then she had a car wreck. So instead of, doing it, I felt really bad because I'm the type of person, I like to help, take care of people. As Jenny said, I like to help out. So my love kind of kicked back in a little harder. And instead of just shooting the dog, we let it go on for 4 or 5 months. So eventually, thankfully, she was brave enough to break up with me. I know that sounds weird, and it was. We didn't talk for a week, and then we were friends for about a month. Y'all been there, I know. I know you've been there. So that didn't work out, of course. We were both sort of torturing each other because we just didn't want to move on. So finally I decided, all right, I'm not going to talk to you for a week. If you talk to me, we'll figure out what happens. If not, cool. We'll figure it out. So she didn't talk to me, and we're both very stubborn, and neither one of us would break and get over the other. So we moved on. I decided myself to take a couple of months at least, maybe years, who knows, to kind of work on myself, figure out what I really wanted, because I really realized that I kind of compromised a lot of what I wanted in our relationship, and I decided it was time to, kind of be a little selfish, figure out what I want, find the person that wants similar things, go from there. So then I started online dating. The last time I online dated was when Tinder was brand new. And the first message I ever received on Tinder from a girl was, "So we hooking up?" I was like, I wonder if Tinder's still like that. It's not. It's a relationship app now. So I downloaded it, and I downloaded Bumble, and I downloaded Hinge. And then all of a sudden I was introduced to the very nice version of ghosting, because I would talk to a girl for like a couple of days, and I'd be like, hey, you want to get something to drink? And then she'd disappear. And then I was like, okay, let's talk for longer. So the next girl I talked to for like a week or 2 weeks. Hey, let's get together. And then they would just vanish. And this went on until I've met a couple of people that changed my life in very odd ways. The first one was a young lady. She decided, I said, hey, you want to hang out? She said, yes. So I was like, cool, what do you want to do? So we can come to my house. I was like, okay, cool. That's cool. I'm a man. I accept it. So I go to a stranger's house, and literally, I text her, like, hey, I'm 5 minutes away, be there in a minute. She sends back, hey, I'm just having to pause this for dramatic effect. I don't know if she really paused, to be honest. She said, hey, so I'm married, but it's cool. I don't know about y'all, me personally, my moral, my ethics, all that good stuff, I don't believe in cheating. I don't cheat on you, something's wrong, I'll probably break up with you and figure out what was wrong, move on, work on it if we can. So I was like, I don't know about that. No, you don't understand, we're poly. And I was like, okay, Google, what is poly? Once again, an old white man, so. So I was like, oh, okay, give her a shot, we'll see what happens. But the issue was, her husband was going to leave, we were going to hang out at the house. His plans fell through, he wasn't leaving. He was going to be like in the bedroom while we were out in the living room. Alright, see what happens, why not? So, we get there, I get there, we're hanging out, she's really nice, she was a really great girl, and what that does was let me meet him. She gave me a text, and it was him in the bedroom, and she was like, hold on a second, he needs something, I need to go see what he wants. So she left. And I don't know if you've ever been sitting in a stranger's dark living room, I'm not gonna lie at this point, with your pants around your ankles. But that's where I was, and oddly enough, she turned on an episode of Ozarks, which at the point I've never seen. So I'm watching Marty Bird and Ruth launder money going, what the heck is going on? When I hear a noise. I'm like, oh, it's probably her coming back to the living room. Because oddly enough, I couldn't hear their mumbles through the wall in my head anymore. So I turn and look to where the hallway is, and there is a 3-foot tall, black hair, white nightgown child staring at me. It wasn't Samara from the Ring. It was her daughter that she didn't tell me about. So when she came back, I was like, cool, I'm out. Even if the husband's cool with cheating, it seems like cheating to me, I'm out. Y'all have a happy life, you're cool. We'll probably never see each other again. Alright, so the next young lady I met was, she's from, I'm not going to say where she's from, because somebody may know, who knows. Anyway, we're going to meet in Lexington. We're going to hang out. She's a 5th and 6th grade chorus teacher. All her pictures are Sunday. So, okay, cool. This is different from the last one. A little different. I'll try, give it a shot. We meet, hang out. She's nice. And it's cool. She's like, hey, they're doing this trivia night at this place. Do you want to go? I love trivia. I'm a genius in the most trivial stuff in the world. And if you bring up the weirdest topic, chances are I can tell you about it. So I'm like, cool, I could use a gift card or somewhere because I know I'm going to win it. Turns out, she was really into SNU and took me to a club that had trivia night. I don't know if you can tell from looking at me, I'm not into that. And for those who don't know what SNU is, I'm not an art. It's bad. Google it. So that didn't work out either. But the silver line of the story is it was cool to meet new people. I love meeting new people. I love having a story to tell. So even though I may never see those ladies again, we had a great story to tell. Hopefully they get to tell their friends about the super vanilla old white guy that they were like, he was damn, he wasn't damn, he was just lying. I didn't say it was damn. Have other stories, if y'all want to hear those stories, because I can't tell them here because we got a little bit of a language thing. Check out open mics around the city, because I come to those a lot. They've got on Fish Tank, Northside Bar, there's one Tuesday. You can hear those stories, I'll tell those. But the silver lining of the story is I've learned people are different. It's amazing to meet new people. It's amazing to figure out things about yourself, because I know some things I don't like. But it's life's an adventure. I want to keep on going. I'm very happy with my mental state at this point in time. I've done a lot of work over the last 5 or 6 months, however long it's been. And hopefully it'll maybe inspire some of you all. Get out of your comfort zone. Try some weird stuff. Not too weird. And that is my story, so I'll give it back to Jenny.
It's been, I don't know, 2-something years since you've been here. It looks different, feels different. I'm really glad to be back. So next month, our theme is ghost. So whether it is both, can be taken as a noun or a verb. And there are good stories to be had about both. So if you are at all interested, you can kind of grab me afterwards, or you can send us a message on Facebook, or you can always send us an email at storytelling@gmail.com, the longest email address. I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. It's so good to be back, to see everybody hear your stories. I hope to see you guys back here next month. If you want to tell a story, let me know. Let us know. We are always looking for brand new. I will also say, if you've never told a story, you've never written a story before, have no fear. You have a story. We will help you figure out how to tell, how to deliver it, but everybody should have a chance of doing it. That's why I love it. So thanks again for coming out, and thanks again, West 6. Thank you to all of you.